Bienvenidos a este programa especial de Canal 22 sobre la literatura de un memorioso que trata de recuperar el lenguaje de la intimidad y las palabras detrás de las palabras y los silencios. David Grossman nació en Jerusalén en 1954. Es considerado uno de los más destacados escritores de la literatura israelí contemporánea. Su obra es muy apreciada por críticos del tamaño de George Steiner y Harold Bloom y novelistas como Salman Rushdie. Entre sus textos destacan el libro de la gramática interna, Véase Amor, el ensayo La muerte como forma de vida y la novela La vida entera. Conversamos con David Grossman desde Jerusalén. David Grossman, thank you very much for this interview for Channel 22 in Mexico.
Thank you for hosting me.
And we would like to start trying to see what memory is all about regarding art, regarding literature. How does this connect? And when you were 9 years old, it happened something very important that connected you with literature in a way, but also with memory. Please tell us about it.
I remember I was a child, and my father, who never spoke about his childhood for a certain reason, suddenly came to me and brought me a book. It was with red cover, very short and thick book, and he gave me the book and he said, "Take it, David. This is how it used to be over there." And there was a smile on his face that I never saw before. My father was a very authoritative man, and suddenly there was something almost childlike on his face, and I took the book and I climbed on the edge of the window and I started to read, and it was a story about a child who was the son of a cantor and his best friend who was a calf, a little cow. And I didn't understand what that is. It had no relevance to my life in the Israel of the early 60s, a country that tried to build up itself from ashes after the Shoah, the Holocaust. But I was fascinated because it was so wonderfully written. And I started to read about the life of this child, Motel, and about his friends, and about this little Jewish shtetl in the diaspora. I didn't know it's in the diaspora. I couldn't locate it. But I was swollen into it, it was swallowing me, this reality. And I think I read the whole volume in 2 or 3 days, and I discovered a new world. I guess, it is as if it will be for children today to discover the world of Harry Potter. It's magic and reality at the same time, with all the inner codes of this reality that were so unfamiliar to me, but once I started to decode them, they became mine. And there was another language. The language Shalom Aleichem wrote in Yiddish, but it was translated to Hebrew. I could have read only in Hebrew. And the language was archaic, it was biblical. Even the numbers of the pages, they were not in numbers, but in letters, like in the book of the Bible or the Talmud. So all in all, I felt I got here a very rare present. Of course, I was sure that this reality of the Jews in East Europe continues to exist in parallel to my life in Israel. I had no idea it was over. And more than that, I understood that my father gives me a key to his childhood, and no child can resist something like that. And in a range of a month, I think, I've read all the writings of Shalom Aleichem that was available in Hebrew. It was plays, it was novels, novellas, essays, things that totally were not meant for a child of 9 years old, but I could not have resisted it. And so I started to have my secret reality and to feel that I belong to it in a way. Now, it's very strange. I was a very Israeli child. I was fascinated by the idea of the new Israel. I felt like all the children of my generation that we are part of something very big, very unusual. You know, I was born 9 years after the Shoah in 1954. I was born 6 years after the creation of Israel. It was all part of something bigger than us and something unique and a new step in our history. And yet I was pulled back in an unresistible power to the past, to all the things that Israel has turned its back on, because Israel didn't want to remember the life of the Jews in those.
That was weakness.
It was weakness, it was humiliation, it was dependence on the others who were much stronger than us. It meant being a people without any power to defend themselves. And here we were in Israel, building the strongest army of the region, having atomic reactor, having the best air force. It was such a contradiction. And yet, I mean, I felt that I found a tunnel to go in between. And I remember one thing. I remember that when I started to tell my best friend at school about this new reality that I have discovered, he gave me a very funny look. And I understood immediately with the instinct of a child. And a child is usually also a kind of survivor. I understood that the stories of Shalom Aleichem should remain my secret.
Oh.
That it's not cool enough. It's too diasporic, you know. It is too Jewish, unlike Israeli, you know. And as I told you, it became my reality until one day, some months later, there was the National Memorial Day for the Shoah. And I should tell you that in these days, our teachers didn't know how to teach us about the memory of the Shoah. It was too fresh, the wound was still open. How can you explain to a child the number 6 million? 6 million is the number of the Jews who were murdered in the Shoah. It's just a number, it says nothing. You know, it takes one Anna Frank to make it painful and relevant. And I remember we were told to come with black trousers and white shirt and to stand upright, you know, and we tried not to giggle and not to laugh when our teachers, who, by the way, themselves were survivors from the Shoah, but, you know, we were threatened by it and embarrassed by their experience, so we didn't know how to handle with it. And suddenly it pierced me that those 6 millions, you know, the victims, the sacred, the saints, all those names that were nothing to me, that these are my secret people. Oh. That this is Motel, the son of the cantor, and Topale Tuturitu, and the fiddler on the roof. All these people who were really I think my most precious secret. And I remember the first reaction was, how they allowed it to happen? Where was their air force? Why didn't they use the tanks? You know, I was an Israeli child. I thought in Israeli terms. And I think, you know, every child has his or her first dead, the first person he knew who died on him. And for me, these people were my first dead. It was an unbelievably painful experience to understand it and to understand that all this world has perished. And also I thought I think it was the first time I thought I want to be a writer at this time, yeah.
Oh,
That's... I think that I want to tell stories, as Shalom Aleichem told me the stories of the Jews in the diaspora. I think, you know, I can articulate it now, but it's only after many years.
Yes.
I think, you know, that literature is the place where things can coexist with their loss. This is the only place. And I thought of it maybe instinctively as a child. Now I know it from many other perspectives in my own life. This is the place where things can coexist with their loss. And this interim existence is really the heart of literature.
Seguiremos conversando con David Grossman sobre su entendimiento de la esencia de la literatura y la memoria en este programa especial de Canal 22 desde Jerusalén. De regreso en este programa especial de Canal 22 desde Jerusalén para conversar con el novelista David Grossman sobre sus intentos por narrar lo incomunicable, las palabras que no han sido escritas.
I think, that literature is the place where things can coexist with their loss.
For your literature also.
Yes.
And you explored it in your novel Sea Under Love, in which George Steiner would say that you made an incredible feat of trying to convey what is incommunicable. When I think of you, I think of a master of silence, of all the little shades that are behind the thoughts, and to be able to capture them so you can communicate what cannot be communicated. And that's a work that just poetry and literature can do it.
I think that the story is really behind the words that we use, the words that writers use in their writing is only a sign to the real story, to lead the reader to the real story. And always the best story is the story that creates more echoes in the heart of the reader, that most things remain untold, that you tell only one layer of this reality. And I feel it even more so in the last book that I just released last week here, which I chose to write a book that is more poetry than prose even. It's a combination. And I think it is because poetry is the closest way of expression, closest to silence. More than fiction, more than prose. In a way, I must say, sometimes I feel that in prose there is something clumsy. And I feel in all my writing I fight against prose. And I've wrote some voluminous books, I know. And yet, I think that poetry has something that prose is struggling to get to.
But your works, your novels, have that intention of getting through channels that we usually don't dare to. And maybe this has to do also with the vulnerability that you choose as a child to explore. The vulnerability that has to do with that old world that you have to keep secret because it was risky not to go into those zones. So this is very important, how to get into that zone, and because we are always protecting ourselves. So there must be a very intense work while writing literature, writing your poetry or the kind of poetry you're trying to do right now, to not betray this delicate impulse that makes you open and vulnerable.
You're very right. I think that usually in our life we protect ourselves. Of course, we don't want to be hurt. I can add that especially here in this part of the world where reality is so painful, it's like an acid sometimes, you must put some protective coating around yourself. But I know I'm vulnerable, and I will always choose to write about things that are dangerous for me. I think almost always in all my writing I chose to write about things that had the potential of really shaking my life, who put into question my relationship with my parents, with my wife, with my children, with my country, my language. I remember, I don't remember after which book it was, but a journalist asked me, well, do you feel now stronger after you have finished this book? And I looked at him and I said, no, this is not the purpose. I want to feel weaker. You know, I don't want to, stronger means that I will have better defense mechanisms. I don't want better defense mechanisms. The temptation for building up defense mechanisms is enormous, and I know it. And I don't want to be defended. I want to be in contact with everything that life brings me. I mean, I think this is the idea of being alive, yeah? It can be the question of how hard it is for the soul and the body to coexist. You know, to think of our soul, this free sparkle of light and life, how it has to adjust to the carnal dimension of a body that we have not chosen, that dictates on us.
They're powerful desires.
Yeah, powerful desires and pains, and our death in the end. Yeah, so this is something that attracts me. Or writing that I wrote about in the book of Intimate Grammar, or to write about the Shoah, or to write, as I did in To the End of the Land, about, you know, the fear of losing a son, or the last book that I just finished last week, which is a book about life with a loss, how to live with a loss. And again, you know, I think we are so protected from life, usually. We are protected. The more old we are, the more we become protected. Of course, it's an illusion. Yes, we cannot really be protected, and life will hit us one way or another, but we have this illusion. And I feel that I shrink in such defenses. You know, even our ability to know others. We don't really know others because we are so protected. We think that we know others. And when I say others, I do not necessarily mean enemies, but even our closest people, you know, our spouses, our children, our best friends. Sometimes, if we admit it, if we are willing to admit it, we know very limited part of their life, of what they are willing to give away, of what is radiated to us from them, but we prefer really not to see the other from all the wholeness of this other. You know, sometimes we think that when we make love, we really know the other. In biblical Hebrew, we use this word to know a woman.
Yes.
And man knew his wife Eve. Ve'adam yada et Chava ishto. I have a good friend who tells me, a lady who says it's written that man knew his wife. It's not written that he has understood his wife. Yeah, but we really believe that in these sweet moments, you know, we really know the other totally. But of course, it's nonsense, because in these moments we suspend from our knowledge all the unpleasant parts of our partner. We don't want to think about the one we make love to as someone who is miserable or irritating
or jealous.
So what we don't want. So it means that even while making love, we don't really know the other. But if you write about someone, and if you allow yourself, you know, to peel all these cataracts, you know, layers of cataract from yourself, and allow this other to penetrate you, to be in you, to see what happens when you allow yourself to surrender totally to another way of being in this life. You know, suddenly you touch this filament of another human being. I must tell you, it's such a sweet reward for years of effort. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the important thing, because at the end, this tenderness, because when you have these vulnerabilities, you try to cover them.
Yeah.
But if you open to that tenderness, then it happens.
It happens.
It happens, that communication that nobody could dream. But it's not shallow, it's something really very delicate and true.
Yeah, yeah. And you feel it's, you know, the days of feeling so regarding one of your characters, and it can be days in a course of writing for 3, 4, 5 years. That the rest is hard work, hard labor. But these sweet moments in which suddenly you expand your being in this life because suddenly you understand the principle of the other.
Like a mirror.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a mirror and a box of echoes, echo box. It allows you, you know, if I chose the right words, if I chose words that allows you to feel the unspoken, unwritten words, you use my story to have your story.
En la novela Tú serás mi cuchillo, David Grossman habla de una historia antigua que dice que la esencia del otro se encuentra en un hueso diminuto que se llama luz. Incluso si el cuerpo se destruye, se rompe o se quema, el hueso de luz no perece. ¿Lo podemos tocar? Regresamos enseguida a este programa especial de Canal 22 desde Jerusalén. Regreso en este programa especial de Canal 22, en donde conversamos en Jerusalén con el novelista David Grossman sobre su formación y el mundo que nutrió su memoria, su literatura. If we do a portrait of the young artist that was David at that time, he had that double awareness of seeing and seeing that he sees.
Yeah.
Seeing in the act of seeing, so to say, that life has another dimension to it, and that you could be a writer. When you did your first exercises in writing?
You know, I think when I was a child, I already started writing, and I liked imagining, not that I was writing everything. When I was, I think, 10, my mother used to do a side job as a typist of theses for students who lived nearby. So I had a typewriting machine in my home, Erica, little Erica, and she allowed me to work on it when she was not writing. And I started writing stories. And I found the pleasure, you know, I didn't know what I'm writing, but the pleasure that I write something and suddenly there's something objective on the page, as if it is real. You know, I'm writing about this imaginary child, and suddenly the thing that I wrote generates all kind of emotions in me. Probably this childish motivation is the heart of the profession, yes, for all those big serious writers. But I think that I really became a writer when I was, I think I was 22 or something, and I had a girlfriend, and we just started to live together, and I loved her desperately, and then we had a quarrel and she left me. She just left me, and she went to her parents in Haifa, and I thought that all my life is over. And then I remember it very until today, as if something took me by force, set me near the desk, the only desk, the kitchen desk that was in our little apartment, and I started writing a story that in a moment before that I had no idea I'm going to write it, about an American soldier who deserted from the war in Vietnam and found shelter in Austria. And he's totally lonely. Nobody loves him there. Nobody wants him there. And the only ones that gives him some human warmth is a bunch of donkeys. and he loves them, and they love him. Now, I wrote it, you know, I felt as a piece of jigsaw puzzle falling into its place, physically. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I felt that this is my way to be in the world. I cannot say in any other words. You know, we have very few moments of such revelations in our life. This was one of them. By the way, I finished the story. I sent it to this girl in Haifa, and she's my wife now for 36 years.
Oh,
Yeah, so there are other, bonuses to writing. Yeah.
oh, that's great.
Yeah,
Great
yeah.
story. And this awareness of having this imagination was nurtured also with your memory. Your memory took you there because when you were a child, you entered into a contest in radio that had to do with Shalom Aleichem.
Okay, that's a nice story. There was, when I was in the heat of reading Shalom Aleichem, suddenly the Israeli radio declared a national contest about the writing of Shalom Aleichem. And I told my parents, I want to go there. And they looked at me and said, I was 9. Come on, it's for, grown-up people, learned people, wait some years. And I said, no, I know Shalom Aleichem. And they refused. I should add that, in my family, it was a very loving family. I was really blessed. But there was a very Jewish code, again, code of survivors, never make yourself a target. I'm really the black sheep of the family, as you can understand. Never make yourself conspicuous. Try to remain silent. When I went to the army, the best advice that my father gave me, always stand in the middle row, not in the first, not in the last. So at the age of 9, I went and I bought the first postcard of my life, and I sent it to the authorities of the Israeli radio, asking them, I want to be pre-tested if I'm worthy or eligible to this competition. And sure enough, a week later, we got a letter from the radio. Now, the radio was governmental in Israel back then. So for my parents, it was as if Ben Gurion has invited me personally. It was unrefusable. So my father took me by the hand very reluctantly and brought me, because I was unable to go alone. I was 9 years old. And everyone thought I accompanied him, but of course he accompanied me. And then the people there started to examine us, to ask us questions. And I was there with all the professors of Hebrew literature. I mean, the most well-known names in the universities. But I had a very fresh memory of a child.
The memorious one.
The memorious one, and I knew everything. And of course, suddenly there was this embarrassment. And you have to remember, it is the Israeli radio of 1963. A very provincial country, and the directorship of the radio has gathered in order to decide what do we do with this child. And they said it is not educational that such a child will win such a big prize. It was something like $100 or something like that. So they said, you cannot take part in the competition, but you shall sit on the side when we broadcast it. And whenever one of the competitors will not know the answer, we shall ask you. And so they did. And so I started my work in the radio. I became a radio man at the age of 9. And I spent 20 years in this radio. It was my second home.
And doing interviews also with writers.
Yeah, and actors and football
poets.
Players and our president and poets. And I had a very unusual childhood, very happy childhood. I mean, I was a very regular child with football and playing cowboys and all that. But I had this radio thing, and I traveled in Israel, accompanied with my mother. And I met the most interesting people of Israel, and I interviewed them. It sounds like a story, but this was my life.
Así era la vida de un gran memorioso. Poco antes de comenzar la entrevista, se confirmó mi hipótesis sobre la memoria de Grossman que se entremira en sus personajes. Mientras mi amigo y productor Froilán López Lavín colocaba los micrófonos, una pequeña cámara de video registró lo siguiente.
You remember that book, Funes el Memorioso from Borges? You remember them, right? I remember every vein of every leaf of the vine. Yeah?
Exactly.
Yeah. This is a trap. I mean, this is someone who is really trapped in his imagination, in his memory, and he cannot make a selection or hierarchy between what is important and what is not important.
Grossman el Memorioso recordaba con detalle el pasaje de Funes el Memorioso. Después de un corte, volvemos con este programa especial de Canal 22 desde Jerusalén, con el novelista David Grossman y la importancia del ejercicio de la memoria y de la literatura para entender al otro. Estamos de regreso en este programa especial de Canal 22 desde Jerusalén con David Grossman. Desde su primera novela está presente la preocupación por la mirada del otro, la mirada de los palestinos y los israelíes, más allá de los prejuicios mutuos. En la novela La vida entera, Grossman retrata la mirada compleja, vulnerable y fascinante de una mujer israelí llamada Ora.
Then it came that moment, that very important moment in which you began to do your first novel.
That was I started writing it in 82, it came in 83. That was a novel about a young Israeli soldier who is a kind of half lunatic, a very exposed person without skin almost, so delicate, and suddenly he cannot take anymore the idea of occupation. He doesn't have any well-set political vision. He just feels something is wrong, something is totally distorted in the fact that one people is occupying another people. And he has a friend, an old Palestinian Hakawati. Hakawati is a storyteller in Arabic. And this soldier, his name was Uri, he falls captive in the imagination of this old Palestinian. And in a way, he makes the Palestinian take him as a hostage. And the Palestinian sets an irrational ultimatum that if the Israeli army does not withdraw in 24 hours from all the occupied territories, he will kill Uri. But this is the initiative of this soldier. It's the idea that he has planted in the mind of the Palestinian.
Of the Palestinian, yeah.
It was the first novel in Hebrew to deal with the occupation. It was written in, as I said, 16 years after the occupation has started. It's very interesting, I think. It says something about a national psyche in distorted situation.
That means it was the breaking of a taboo in the collective consciousness in a way also.
In a way, yes. And there were no words to describe this reality. This is, I think, this is something that attracts me. When there are no words to tell something, when I feel that the language falls short to describe a situation. Because, at that time, when I was writing The Smile of the Lamb, I was already the anchorman, the chief anchorman of the morning news magazine in Israel. I mean, the most important news magazine. And I had to use, as part of my job in the governmental radio, a special dictionary. And this dictionary was forged especially to make the formulation of the occupation possible. Because, every normal society or every moral society finds it impossible to describe extreme situations that it is partner of. Every moral person, and most of us are moral people. There are some psycho, but most of us are moral people. And for us, the idea that we are occupying another people, that we are humiliating and subjugating and preventing other people from their basic rights, it is unbearable. We can create all kinds of justifications for this situation, and we can say many arguments that some of them are right. And yet, deep in our heart, we feel that we are partners to something that is wrong. So the government and the media and the army and the police, they all come together in order to fabricate a language that would...
Euphemisms.
Euphemisms, yeah, exactly. I call it whitewashed language. You know, words that all the real contents of them were whitewashed long ago, so they are neutral. They do not confront you with atrocity, with your guilt. With guilt, this is the first thing.
You call it the situation, hamatzav.
Hamatzav.
Just not to say specifically what it's all about.
Yeah, this is the most frequent Israeli word, hamatzav. We say hamatzav, and by that we refer to the occupation, to the terror, to existential fear, to all the pressures, to all the people who died. This is hamatzav. But of course, it's a euphemism, because hamatzav in Hebrew means something stable, something yatziv. You can, without understanding Hebrew, you can see the sounds. Matzav yatziv, you hear the similarity. But there is nothing stable about this matzav, about this situation. It's a constant bleeding of 100 years. And we learned how to coexist with it. And we do not even believe that there is an alternative reality for us to have our life. Again, here comes literature and reminds us that wherever people are involved, there is not matzav, there is not something, you know, stable. That in every human predicament there are currents and subcurrents and contradictions and agitation. And the ability of literature to make all these things surface, unlike the media, by the way. Mm-hmm. The media, in a way, tells people the stories they already know, especially in situations like ours. It is terrible to watch that by the vocabulary that it uses, that does not describe reality but buffers between the citizen and reality. And if there is any significance to literature in such conditions, is that it can, you know, regain for us, it allows us to regain our human face and our individuality from the situation.
And you know, in the case of your book, to the End of the Land, it makes that people that usually seems to belong to the right, or people that belongs to the left, they are saying, this is our book. What phenomena are you touching with your literature when the readers that are always ideologically blinded begin to see what really feels to touch the other, and to feel that they are speaking about reality and not about cliché?
The main character, Ora, and her family, because Ora is not very politicized person, you know, there are some things she feels that are very right-wingish, and some are very, very leftist, much more than myself, by the way. But being her, being Ora, being not protected or not shielded, she swings very freely between the different instincts and feelings that she has. She allows herself to be totally afraid and suspicious towards the Arab, where there are good reasons to be afraid and suspicious. And she allows herself to be so compassionate and empathetic to them when there are reasons to be so. Part of the fee that we all pay for being locked in this situation is that we become hermetic. Each and every one of us is trapped in our opinions. It is so hard. I mean, it's easier in Israel to change your gender rather than to change your political position. Truly. But each side is imprisoned in his opinions. And this book and the character of Ora allowed suddenly people to, you know, to explore all the things that they would never allow themselves to explore in real life. I remember in one day I met two people who are quite iconic people of the right and of the left in Israel. By chance, I met them. And both of them told me, this is my book. Ora is me. And I thought, if I could only have found the way to make them meet in real life.
I would like to know, for example, what's a Palestinian reading of your book? Because, this is very interesting to see how they see in the mirror of intimacy, because your book is about it.
Yeah, this always interests me. I mean, I'm interested in readers in different countries because, I like their literature, I like their character, I want to know how my writing echoes there. But of course, one of the most interesting constituency is the Palestinians. And this book, for example, got some reviews. It was reviewed in many papers, in Arabic papers, but there is a paper, El Hayat. It's the biggest Arabic paper coming out in London. And the reviewer ended his review and he said, it's a book about love. It's a love of a woman and two men. It's about love of a brother to his brother. It's a book about love of a young Israeli soldier to his country. Now, I read it, I was deeply moved because I think it was the first time that I know of that an Arabic reviewer or intellectual allowed himself to legitimize the love that we feel for this country. I think it's an important nuance in this attitude, to understand that we also love this country, that to allow us this love. Both sides, even if logically they know that the other side is very much connected to this place and rooted, they will not be generous enough to allow the love that we both love the same land. It's like two men who love the same woman or vice versa. To allow us to have this love indicates that there is an understanding that we belong here.
La literatura permite percibir desde adentro el drama y la tragedia de otras culturas. Después de un corte, volvemos enseguida a este programa especial de Canal 22 desde Jerusalén con el novelista David. Estamos de regreso en este programa especial de Canal 22 desde Jerusalén para conversar con el novelista David Grossman sobre la mirada de la literatura que nutre su lucha por la paz y por la recuperación de los lenguajes de la intimidad y la compasión.
To the End of the Land has to do with love within family, but also with love to the country, by walking its roads, by describing the minutiae of the plans, of all the details. And there is a feeling like if the characters are like some kind of ghosts that cannot believe that they are living where they are living. But that's a very important dimension also.
Israel is called the promised land. Now it's interesting, it's almost the everlasting promised land. You never get there. It's not the land that was promised. It's not the land of the promise. It is the promised land, always promised land. We never get there. Well, it's not so bad, because it creates a desire to accomplish something better. But I think you are very right in your observation that we still do not really believe that we have it.
What has triggered your novel to the End of the Land, and how did you walk out these roads as to have a touch, a concrete touch with the land? Because there is some of this hope there, or some of this desire.
For years I wanted to write a story about a family that will... I'm fascinated by families. In all my books, yes, families are really the greatest creation of mankind. No matter what kind of families, and today families are very flexible in their structure. And I wanted to plant this family in our situation, to show how this situation radiates itself into the delicacy and the tenderness of this bubble of family, bubble of tenderness. And I did not have any idea, I did not have any idea that would combine the two things. And then I thought about a woman that will send her son to the army and will decide not to wait for the notifiers who will come with the bad news and will run away. But her running away will not be an escapism, but rather it will be a way to create something new and to create a new relationship between her and her country even. And the whole story started when I walked in Israel. I walked from the very north of Israel, the Lebanese border, until my home in Jerusalem. The walking itself is 500 kilometers. And it is part of the Israeli path. The Israeli path is a path that goes from the very north to the very south up. And I wanted to walk it before I was writing it. I wanted to do this. I like physical efforts, and this book allowed me to explore it, to walk every day 20, 25 kilometers alone. I walked alone, and when you walk alone, you become like another creature. You happen to walk on two legs, but actually you are a creature. And immediately there is another conversation between you and the plants and the trees and the soil and the animals that come. And I would love to do it again, to repeat this experience. And the people that you meet on this walk, they behave differently. They are much more relaxed and much more open to you. I asked every person that I met, I asked two questions. Some of the answers are in the book. What do you long for and what you regret? And I got so really deep and moving answers. But what amazed me more is the immediacy of the answers, as if people were waiting to be asked these questions. They just threw them out immediately. They gave me those precious things.
And this touches another nerve of your books that is very important, the confession, the spontaneous confession. When it happens, how it happens, and how a heart opens up to another heart just because it happens, without further purpose, without further motives. And I think that this is something very important in your novel, But for me, what is really very interesting is to see how three people like Ilan, Ora, and Abraham have what Julio Cortázar would call the kibbutz of the desire, the communion of desire. Something that is very difficult, and yet it happens all the time, but we don't register it.
I am always surprised by the immediacy of the openness, how people really want to be seen by others and be understood by others, how people need that their story will be embraced in the right way. And if they trust you, if they think that you will not betray their story, they give it to you with such generosity and urgency even. And for me, writing this book, was a way to find the words and the nuances, and to be able to give language to a situation that was superficialized totally. Giving names and words to everything, and I insisted on that, from the fauna and the flora, and love making, and situations of terrible war. I wanted to tell the story because I felt that I was deprived of words already. That, you know, maybe I can explain it, because the language is a way to be in contact with reality. The more elaborate and precise you are in the nuances of your words, you touch more nuances in reality. But who wants to touch reality with such high resolution when reality is so painful? That whenever you just stick your nose out of it, you get a blow in your face. And I feel that this is the destructive process, that we are enclosing more and more and more. And we sometimes I thought of it that we become like a suit of armor, but without the knight, the person within it. And I think that our war is not only against an enemy. Our war is against this declining, this narrowing down. This is the war that should be fought by us. And writing this book was for me this way, you know, I will not surrender to this narrowing down. And I must tell you that for me, and I think for some of my readers, it was a way to renew the contract with this reality and with the country.
And that's a way of recapturing also language, you know. One of the beautiful things that I also saw in your book is that it goes even through nature, because you begin to say that even nature has some connection with Hebrew language, that reality itself has a connection with this inner language that we are losing. Unfortunately, when we read your books, we just can't read them in translations. But in Hebrew, there must be also a sense of rescuing that inner language that is lost between nature and ourselves.
Yeah. The feeling here, I don't know, maybe every country, every culture feels the same. And I will tell only about Hebrew and Arabic, by the way. There is a feeling that the language came out, grew out from the soil. The soil is tough, is dry here. We don't have enough rain. It's rocky. And also the Hebrew language is such, and all these and all these sounds that we have, they are so adequate to the land, to the earth itself, and to the harshness of the landscape here. It's really a wonderful example of unification of language and reality.
And language, and the Hebrew language itself, in a conceptual level, has this ability to be algebraic, being very concise, like a haiku.
Yeah, well, this is the heart of our language, and it's the structure of the language and the way the Bible is formulated. You know that in the Bible, for example, there are almost no mentioning of emotions. It's very concise, the Bible. The Bible is literature of acts. And you have to fill in the emotions. And it's very strong. It's very ascetic and as you say, very refined and strong. Now, our literature in last generations is in the other way. I think after having been deprived for so many years from these emotions, we want to explore them and we want to give words for them. And personally, I feel that as much as I give words for them, as much high resolution I try to do, I still didn't touch the beginning of the emotional world of one person. Sometimes people, when they read my books, they are surprised. They say, we didn't know that things like that exist in Israel. Because they are used to see Israel from the screen of television and the CNN, and they see only clashes and violence and terror and occupation. But I insist to write about the wholeness of life. I mean, these are the things that matter. These are the things that are worth fighting for. The interiority, the most important, significant things that happened in the history of mankind, they did not have occurred on battlefields, and not in palaces, and not in parliaments, but rather in kitchens, and in bedrooms, and of course in rooms of children. Children are very important.
And the imagination of children.
And the imagination, and all the worlds that are created and demolished in one sentence. And we look at ourselves and we think that we are very stable people, more or less, but if you put a seismograph who can detect all the nuances, all the vibrations of our sensations and feelings and passions and regrets and fears. Every hour of us is an ocean, is an ocean. And I have such, thirst to document it, to understand it, to understand what is this life.
David Grossman, thank you, thank you very much.
Thank you, I really enjoyed
For
this.
a master of nuances and silence.